My husband secretly sold my jewelry collection. You're overreacting, he scoffed. Then his world collapsed. Imagine coming home after a long trip, expecting peace, only to find out that everything you cherished, everything that held meaning, was gone. My husband had secretly sold my jewelry collection, family heirlooms passed down for generations, just to fund his so-called big business idea. And he had the audacity to smirk and say, "You'll thank me later." But what he didn't know, I wasn't about to let him get away with it. I had a plan, a way to make him pay in ways he never saw coming. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's about revenge, justice, and taking back control. I never thought I'd walk into my own home and feel like a stranger. But that night, something was off the second I stepped through the door. The warm glow of the hallway lights should have been comforting, but instead, it felt staged, like a set piece in a play where I wasn't the lead anymore. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, but the scent didn't match the eerie stillness in the house. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor as I rolled my suitcase inside, my body heavy with exhaustion from the 6-hour flight. All I wanted was a long shower, a glass of wine, and to collapse into my bed. But the moment I saw Nathan sitting there, lounging on the couch like a king on his throne, I knew my night was far from over. He was too relaxed, legs stretched out, one arm draped over the back of the couch, that damn smirk on his face, like he was enjoying a joke only he understood. The TV was on, but the sound was low, almost like he wanted to hear my reaction the second I realized what he had done. A slow, creeping unease settled in my chest. "You're back," he said smoothly, his voice laced with amusement. "I am," I replied, setting my purse down. "What's with the smile?" "Oh, nothing," he said, waving a hand like he was brushing away an unimportant detail. "You'll find out soon enough. That was it. That was the moment. The moment my stomach twisted, my mind sharpened, and my instincts screamed that something was wrong. I dropped my suitcase by the door and folded my arms. "Nathan, what did you do?" He let out a dramatic sigh and leaned forward, rubbing his hands together like he was about to deliver some grand speech. "You always wanted me to take initiative, right? To be more ambitious?" I stiffened. I hated when he talked like that, like he was positioning himself as the hero of some self-made success story. "Nathan," I repeated, my patience running razor thin. "What did you do?" His smirk widened, his eyes sparkling with something between excitement and arrogance. "I sold your jewelry collection." The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I just stared at him, my brain refusing to process what he had just said. The air in the room shifted, thickened. My pulse roared in my ears. He had to be joking. He had to be testing me. But the way he sat there, so damn smug, told me this wasn't a prank. This wasn't a misunderstanding. "My jewelry," I whispered, barely able to form the words. He nodded, still grinning. "Before you freak out, just hear me out. It was a smart move. That collection was just sitting there, gathering dust. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. And guess what? It paid off. The money went into something bigger, something for us. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak, my hands numb at my sides. My jewelry collection wasn't just some pile of expensive trinkets. It was my history, my grandmother's heirlooms, gifts from my mother, pieces I had saved up for, worked for, celebrated milestones with. And he had taken them, sold them, as if they were his to give away. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. Nathan rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Louisa. Don't be dramatic. It's not like you ever wore half of it." I felt something snap inside me. It was more than anger. It was betrayal, deep and jagged, cutting through every fiber of my being. I had trusted him. Despite his recklessness, despite his ego, I had believed foolishly that he respected me, that he valued the things I valued. But I was wrong. I took a slow, steady breath. "Where is it?" My voice was calm, too calm. His expression flickered, just for a second, before he masked it with nonchalance. "Oh, it's gone, babe. Sold. Liquidated. That money is already moving investments, assets, big things on the horizon." I swallowed down the bile rising in my throat. He thought this was over. He thought I would yell, cry, maybe throw a few things, then get over it, like I always had. But not this time. Because what he didn't know, what he never even considered, was that I had planned for something like this. Months ago, after hearing about a string of high-end burglaries, I had taken extra precautions. Tiny, nearly invisible tracking devices, discreetly embedded in the clasps and settings of my most valuable pieces. Not because I thought my own husband would betray me, but because I knew the world was unpredictable. What I hadn't realized was that the real threat had been sitting next to me all along. I forced my hands to unclench, my face to relax. "I see," Nathan chuckled, oblivious. "There we go. See, I knew you'd come around. In a few months, when this pays off, you'll be thanking me." I smiled. A small, tight smile. The kind that hid knives. "I guess we'll see." Because I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to ruin him. Here is the second part of the story, written with suspense, tension, and emotional depth. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, gripping the cool ceramic of my coffee mug, as if it were the only thing tethering me to reality. The silence in the house was thick, suffocating, stretching between Nathan and me like an invisible battlefield. He had gone to bed hours ago, completely unbothered, as if he hadn't just ripped apart something irreplaceable, as if he hadn't shattered the very foundation of trust between us. The audacity, the arrogance. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. My hands trembled as I unlocked my phone, my breath shallow. The tracking app was already open, the tiny red dots scattered across the city like breadcrumbs leading me straight to my stolen jewelry. A high-end consignment shop downtown. An auction house. A private collector. My heart pounded, my mind racing through possibilities. Nathan had moved quickly, which meant he had been planning this. He had looked at my collection, the sentimental value, the history behind each piece, and seen nothing but dollar signs. I had underestimated him. That was my mistake. I wouldn't make it again. I forced myself to take a slow, steady breath, steadying my hands as I scrolled through my contacts. Megan. She was the only person I trusted to help me now. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy but immediately alert. "Eve, it's after midnight. What's wrong?" I hesitated for half a second before whispering, "Nathan sold my jewelry." There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp inhale. "He what? Every piece," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "Without telling me. And he's proud of it, Megan. He thinks he did me a favor." A slow exhale. "That son of a... I have tracking data," I cut in, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know where most of it is, but I need a plan. I need to be smart about this." Megan was quiet for a beat, then her voice hardened. "Okay. First things first, you need to protect yourself. If he was bold enough to do this, what else is he willing to pull? Do you have access to your finances?" I swallowed hard. "He handles most of our accounts." "Then that's your next step. Get to the bank first thing in the morning. See what's been moved. And Louisa," her voice softened slightly, "you need to decide how far you want to take this. Because if he's willing to steal from you now, what happens next?" I clenched my jaw. "He doesn't get to walk away from this, Meg. I'm done letting him play games." "Good," she said. "Then let's make sure he pays for it." I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Nathan breathing beside me. He was completely at ease, like a man who believed he was untouchable. The thought made my blood boil. By the time morning came, my decision was solidified. No more second chances. No more forgiveness. By the time I pulled into the bank's parking lot, my stomach was a tight knot of anxiety and fury. The teller greeted me with a polite smile as I slid my ID across the counter. "I need to check my accounts." I said, keeping my voice calm, both personal and joint. She nodded, typing into her computer. The minutes stretched unbearably long before she finally frowned, glancing at the screen. It looks like several transactions have been made recently. Large withdrawals, some transfers to offshore accounts. My stomach dropped. How much? She hesitated. I can't disclose all details without authorization, but a significant amount. Nathan wasn't just selling my jewelry, he was liquidating our assets. He was securing himself while leaving me with nothing. The realization sent a cold, sharp clarity through me. Can I freeze my accounts? I asked, my voice like steel. Your personal accounts, yes, she said. But for joint accounts, you'll need legal documentation. Then I'll get it. I walked out of the bank with one thing on my mind. I needed a lawyer, and I needed one fast. Megan met me for coffee an hour later, her expression tight with concern. Did you find anything? I exhaled sharply. He's moving money, Megan, draining our accounts. Offshore transfers. She cursed under her breath. He's trying to cut you off. I nodded, but he won't get the chance. I made my next call to a lawyer Megan had recommended. Within hours, I was sitting in a sleek office across from a woman who radiated competence and authority. Your husband's actions are legally considered fraud, she said after reviewing the documents. Selling your property without consent, especially assets of high value, is theft. And if he's been moving money without your knowledge, you may have grounds for legal separation and financial protection. I swallowed hard. What do I need to do? First, we file for legal separation. That allows you to protect your personal finances immediately. Next, we gather evidence. If you want to take legal action, you need proof. I hesitated for a split second before pulling out my phone. I have tracking data on my jewelry. I know where it's being sold. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. That's impressive. If you can retrieve the pieces and prove unauthorized sale, it strengthens your case. I nodded. Then let's do it. By the time I walked out of that office, something inside me had shifted. Nathan had thought he could control me, manipulate me, strip me of my autonomy. He had counted on me being too blindsided, too emotional to fight back. But he was wrong. By the end of the day, I had filed the paperwork, frozen my personal accounts, and gathered every piece of financial evidence I could find. Nathan had set this in motion, but I was going to finish it. That night, when I walked into the house, he was waiting. So, he said, leaning against the kitchen counter, a smug smirk tugging at his lips. Busy day? I dropped my keys on the table, meeting his gaze without flinching. Yeah, very. He let out a slow chuckle. You're not actually mad about this, are you? You'll see, Louisa. This was a good move. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. A good move? You mean selling my property behind my back? Stealing from me? Nathan scoffed. Oh, don't be so dramatic. We're married. What's mine is yours, right? A bitter laugh escaped me. You really think that works both ways? He pushed off the counter, stepping closer. You'll understand once the money starts rolling in. I took a breath, steadying myself. Actually, Nathan, I think you'll be the one understanding something very soon. He frowned slightly. And what's that? I smiled. Cold, sharp, that you've made the biggest mistake of your life. His expression darkened. What did you do, Louisa? One grabbed my purse, turned toward the stairs, and looked at him over my shoulder. Oh, you'll find out soon enough. And just like that, the game had officially begun. So there I was, staring at my husband, who thought he had outsmarted me. He truly believed I would just accept what he did and move on. But what if I told you? I had already planned for something like this. What if I told you I had a secret weapon that would turn everything against him? Now, I had two choices: confront him immediately and risk losing control, or play the long game and make sure his entire world came crashing down. What would you do? Comment 1 if you think I should expose him right now, or 2 if I should make him suffer first. Let's see what you would have done. Here is the first part of the conflict development, written with suspense, tension, and emotional depth. I stood outside the high-end consignment shop, staring through the pristine glass windows at the glittering pieces inside. My heartbeat was a steady drum in my ears, my pulse thrumming with anger and adrenaline. Somewhere in there, my jewelry, the heirlooms, the gifts, the memories was sitting under bright showroom lights, waiting to be sold off to the highest bidder. My stomach churned at the thought. Nathan had stolen from me, sold pieces of my history like they were nothing more than trinkets, and now I was about to take them back. I pulled in a slow breath, squared my shoulders, and pushed open the glass door. A delicate chime rang overhead as I stepped inside, and immediately the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume filled the air. The boutique was sleek and modern, every display case spotless, every piece of jewelry arranged with precision. A woman in her mid-50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood behind the counter, adjusting a pair of reading glasses as she glanced up at me. "Good afternoon," she greeted, offering a professional smile. "How can I help you today?" I forced my lips into a polite curve, though my hands were clenched at my sides. "I believe you recently acquired a collection of jewelry," I said, sliding my phone across the counter. The screen displayed a photo of my grandmother's sapphire ring, the one Nathan had so carelessly pawned. "I'd like to know if it's still in your inventory." The woman frowned slightly, adjusting her glasses as she peered at the image. "Let me check our records." She turned to the computer, fingers tapping against the keyboard, while I stood frozen, my pulse hammering. The moment stretched unbearably long, my entire body tense with anticipation. Finally, she let out a quiet hum and turned the screen slightly toward me. "It was brought in 3 days ago," she confirmed, her tone thoughtful. "A gentleman named Nathan Dawson sold it, along with several other pieces. He claimed they were family heirlooms he no longer needed." My jaw tightened. "Did he?" The woman's gaze flickered back to me, her sharp eyes studying my face. "Are you a relative?" I exhaled, forcing myself to stay composed. "I'm his wife." There was a pause. Just a second of hesitation, but it was enough to confirm she understood the situation. She straightened slightly, glancing at the screen again. "It hasn't sold yet. We were actually preparing to list it at auction next week. But if there's a dispute over ownership..." "There is," I interrupted, reaching into my bag and pulling out a neatly folded document, the police report I had filed earlier that morning. "This sale was unauthorized. I have proof. Tracking data, ownership records, an open case with the authorities." The woman took the papers, skimming them with a critical eye. When she finally looked up, something in her expression had shifted. "I see." She let out a sigh, glancing toward the back of the store. "Give me a moment." I nodded, watching as she disappeared into a side room. The air in the boutique felt stifling now, thick with the weight of betrayal and rage. I flexed my fingers, forcing myself to stay calm. Nathan had thought he could get away with this, had thought I would just accept it. But he was wrong. So wrong. A minute later, the woman returned, holding a small, velvet-lined box. She placed it on the counter and flipped it open, and there it was. The sapphire ring gleamed under the bright showroom lights, deep blue, perfectly polished. The sight of it sent a sharp pang through my chest. My grandmother had worn this ring every day until the day she passed. It had been meant to stay in the family, to be cherished, to carry history, not to be pawned off by a man who saw everything in terms of value. I reached out, running my fingers lightly over the cool metal, then looked up. "I need to take it back." The woman hesitated for only a second before nodding. "I'll put a hold on it and notify the police that we're cooperating with the case. Legally, I can't release it just yet, but once everything is cleared, it will be returned to you." My stomach unclenched slightly. "Thank you." The woman studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You're not the first wife I've seen in a situation like this," she said quietly. "Men like that, they always think they can take what isn't theirs." I swallowed hard, nodding. "Not this time." I left the store feeling lighter, but only slightly. One down, more to go. The second location, a high-end auction house, was across town. By the time I arrived, the sky had darkened, the city lights flickering to life, Detective Carter was already waiting outside, leaning against his car, arms crossed. "They've been cooperative so far," he said as I approached. "Confirmed they received a collection of items from your husband and agreed to put a hold on the sale while we sort this out." Relief flooded through me. "Did they say which pieces?" Carter nodded toward the building. "Let's go see." Inside, the atmosphere was far different than the boutique. The walls were lined with fine art, glass cases filled with rare antiques, and in the center of the room, a grand display area showcasing select auction items. It reeked of old money, Nathan's kind of place. A suited man greeted us, his expression tight but professional. "Detective Carter, Mrs. Dawson, please come with me." We were led to a private office, where a locked glass case sat in the center of the room. The man produced a set of keys, unlocking the display with a quiet click, then carefully lifted the lid. My breath caught. My mother's diamond bracelet, my gold pendant, the one I had bought for myself after getting my first big promotion, and the emerald earrings Nathan had once pretended to admire. Carter gave a low whistle. "Quite the collection." I swallowed hard. "He sold them all at once?" The auctioneer nodded. "Yes." He claimed he was liquidating assets for a new business venture. A bitter laugh escaped me. "Of course, he did." Carter turned to the man. "We need to hold these items. This is part of an active case, and Mrs. Dawson is filing official claims to have them returned." The man hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Understood." I looked at Carter. "How soon can I get them back?" "That depends on the legal process," he admitted. "But we've got a strong case. The tracking data is damning. We'll push for a quick resolution." I exhaled a slow breath, steadying myself. "Okay." As we stepped out of the auction house, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. Nathan had thought he had one that he could take and I would just accept it. But he was wrong. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Here is the second part of the conflict development. Written with suspense, tension, and emotional depth, I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, as I pulled into the parking lot of the third location on my list, a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Unlike the upscale consignment store and the polished auction house, this place had an entirely different feel. It wasn't a showroom, it wasn't a boutique, it was a distribution hub, a middleman in the chain of transactions that had scattered my stolen jewelry across the city. This was where things got murky, where high-end pieces got lost in the shuffle of countless other illicit deals. If I was going to find what was mine, I had to move fast. Detective Carter pulled in beside me, stepping out of his car with the same calm authority he carried everywhere. His presence steadied me, even as my stomach twisted in knots. "You sure about this place?" he asked, scanning the building. I nodded, gripping my purse strap tighter. "The tracking data led here. Some of my pieces passed through this location." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the burning anger threatening to bubble over. Nathan had no idea I embedded trackers in my most valuable jewelry. He thought he could just take everything and get away with it. Carter exhaled sharply, glancing toward the warehouse entrance. "Places like this don't just hand over information. If your jewelry's still here, we might have to push harder." I squared my shoulders, forcing down the nerves. "Let's do it?" We walked toward the entrance, where a tall, broad-shouldered man stood leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. He was in his late 40s, his face rough with deep lines and a permanent scowl. He watched us with careful calculation, his eyes flickering between me and Carter. The moment he spotted Carter's badge, his expression darkened. "You lost?" he asked, his voice thick with suspicion. Carter didn't flinch. "Not at all. We're investigating a transaction that led back to this warehouse." He pulled out a printed document. "We have reason to believe stolen goods, specifically high-end jewelry, passed through here recently." The man barely glanced at the paper before scoffing. "We don't deal in stolen goods." "Good to hear," Carter said smoothly. "Then you won't mind us checking your records." A tense silence settled between us. My pulse pounded in my ears. I could feel the resistance in the air, the unspoken calculations running through the man's mind. He was deciding whether it was worth stonewalling us, whether we were a real threat or just another nuisance he could brush off. I took a step forward before he could decide against us. "Look," I said, my voice sharp, "I don't care about your business. I don't care what else moves through this place. I just want what's mine." A man sold my jewelry collection without my consent. Some of it ended up here. If you help me, we walk away. No trouble. The man looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he let out a slow exhale and jerked his head toward the entrance. "Wait here." I clenched my fists at my sides as he disappeared into the dimly lit warehouse. I wanted to follow. I wanted to make sure he didn't suddenly lose my things. But Carter placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Let him work," he murmured. Minutes stretched unbearably long. My stomach twisted in tight knots. If my pieces were here, I had to get them before they disappeared into some underground resale network, never to be seen again. Finally, the man returned, holding a sleek black case. He placed it on a metal crate between us and flipped the latch with a practiced motion. The lid popped open, and there it was, my pearl necklace, my diamond earrings, and, at the very center, the delicate gold watch my father had given me on my 18th birthday. A wave of emotions crashed over me. It wasn't the most expensive piece. It wasn't flashy. But it was the most personal. My father had worn it for years before passing it down to me, telling me it would remind me that time is my most valuable possession. And now it had almost been lost forever. "You're lucky," the man grunted, crossing his arms. It was scheduled for transport tomorrow. Another day, and it would have been halfway across the country. I reached forward, but before my fingers could touch the watch, the man snapped the case shut. "Not so fast," he said. Carter stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This is part of an active theft case. You want to argue over paperwork, or do you want to cut your losses now?" Another beat of silence. Then the man muttered a curse under his breath and shoved the case toward me. "Take it, but don't come back." I barely registered his words as I lifted the case, pressing it to my chest. Relief flooded through me, mingling with a quiet rage. Nathan had done this. He had taken pieces of my life and thrown them into the hands of men who dealt in transactions, not memories. Not anymore. I turned without another word, following Carter back to the car. Only once the doors were shut did I finally release the breath. "I'd been holding. You okay?" Carter asked, watching me closely. I nodded, though my hands trembled as I unlatched the case again. The gold watch gleamed under the dim car light. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, my father's initials still engraved on the back. "He gave this to me on my 18th birthday," I murmured. "Told me to always remember, my time is my own." Carter nodded. "Seems like good advice." I closed the case, gripping it tightly. Nathan thought he could take everything from me, but he doesn't get to keep a single thing. Carter smirked. "That's the spirit." As we pulled out of the lot, my phone buzzed. A message from Megan, "Call me the second you're done." "I have news." A knot of curiosity twisted in my stomach. I dialed her number immediately, barely waiting for her to pick up. "Well?" I demanded. Megan let out a slow exhale. "I did some digging. And, Louisa, you need to hear this." My pulse spiked. "What?" Megan hesitated. "Nathan's business, his empire, it's not what he claims. There's a reason he was so desperate for cash." My fingers clenched around the phone. "Spit it out, Megan." A pause. "Then, he's drowning in debt. And I'm not talking small business struggles. I'm talking lawsuits, unpaid loans, shady offshore accounts. Louisa, he's been hiding a financial disaster. And I think that's why he sold your jewelry. Not for his big investment. To save his own skin." The air was sucked out of my lungs. Nathan hadn't just stolen from me. He hadn't just betrayed my trust. He was going under. And now, for the first time, I realized something chilling. If Nathan was this desperate, then he wasn't just going to let me walk away. Here's the third part of the conflict development, continuing from the previous section. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Megan's words echoed in my head like a relentless drumbeat. Nathan wasn't just reckless, he was drowning in financial ruin, and he had used me as his lifeline. Selling my jewelry wasn't about ambition or opportunity, it was desperation, and desperate men did desperate things. I swallowed hard, staring blankly at my phone. The screen was still lit with Megan's last message. He's been hiding a financial disaster, and I think that's why he sold your jewelry. Not for his big investment, to save his own skin. I forced myself to take a deep breath. My fingers trembled as I typed back, "How bad is it?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Megan was hesitating. That wasn't like her. Then her reply popped up. "It's worse than I thought. He's been moving money offshore. There are lawsuits. And Louisa. I think he's being investigated." My stomach plummeted. Investigated? My mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. The offshore accounts, the missing money. Nathan's sudden insistence that I trust him. Oh my God. I felt sick. If the authorities were looking into him, and if my name was tied to any of those transactions, I could go down with him. No, I couldn't let that happen. I yanked my purse onto my lap and dug through it, pulling out my notebook. I needed to be methodical. I needed to figure out exactly what I was dealing with before I made a move. The bank. That was my next stop. If Nathan was funneling money, I had to find out what was left before it was too late. The drive to our bank was a blur. By the time I stepped inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs. I forced a calm smile at the teller, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and short cropped hair. "I need to check my accounts," I said, sliding my ID across the counter. "Everything in my name and anything I co-own with my husband." She nodded, typing quickly into her computer. The seconds stretched unbearably long. My fingers drummed against the counter. Then her expression changed. Her brows furrowed slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Miss Carter," she said slowly, "some of your joint funds have been recently transferred." My throat tightened. "Transferred where?" She hesitated, glancing at me. "I can't disclose full details without your husband's authorization, but I can tell you that significant withdrawals have been made over the past 3 weeks. Some funds were moved offshore. Offshore." I gritted my teeth, rage bubbling up inside me. He hadn't just sold my jewelry. He was draining our accounts, moving money, covering his tracks before everything collapsed. I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay composed. "I need to freeze my personal accounts immediately," I said, "and I need to remove my name from any joint accounts." The teller hesitated. "If these are joint accounts, we may need legal documentation." "I'll get it," I said firmly. I left the bank in a daze. My mind was spinning, a tornado of fury, disbelief, and something else, determination. Nathan thought he could do this, that he could take everything from me, leave me with nothing, and walk away unscathed. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I dialed Megan the moment I got in my car. "I need a lawyer," I said without preamble. "A damn good one." Megan didn't miss a beat. "I already have a name. I'll text you the details." I exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. "Thank you." "Eve, be careful." I swallowed hard. "I will." I drove straight to the law office. By the time I sat across from Lisa Harding, a sharp-eyed attorney with a no-nonsense demeanor, my adrenaline had settled into a cold, calculated resolve. Lisa flipped through the financial statements I provided, shaking her head. "Your husband isn't just reckless," she said. "He's actively committing fraud. Offshore transfers, shell companies, unauthorized withdrawals. He's been hiding money for months." My stomach twisted. "How much of this can be traced back to me?" Lisa sighed. "Some of the accounts are in both of your names. If investigators believe you are complicit, you could be dragged into this." I clenched my jaw. So what do I do? You get ahead of it, Lisa said firmly. We file for legal separation immediately. We freeze all accounts in your name. We cut financial ties as much as possible. That way, if charges are filed against your husband, you won't be held responsible. I nodded. Do it. Lisa leaned forward. There's one more thing. If he realizes you're making moves, he might try to retaliate. Financially, legally, or worse. I let out a bitter laugh. That's exactly what he does. Charm, threats, guilt, whatever it takes to stay in control. Lisa's expression hardened. Then you need to be prepared. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at Megan's apartment, unable to face Nathan just yet. We sat on her couch with glasses of wine, the TV on in the background, though neither of us was watching. You're doing the right thing, Megan said softly. I know, I murmured. But I'm not ready for the storm that's coming. Megan sat back. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be smarter than him. The next morning, Lisa filed the separation paperwork. Within hours, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Nathan. What the hell is this? You're making a huge mistake. You think you can do this to me? I ignored them all. By the time I finally returned home that evening, Nathan was waiting. He stood in the living room, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral, but I knew him too well. Beneath that forced calm was seething rage. So this is how you want to do this? He asked, his voice low. I'm done, Nathan, I said simply, setting my keys on the counter. I know everything, the offshore accounts, the missing money, the fraud. His eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. I shook my head. Don't insult me, Nathan. I've already spoken to the police, to my lawyer. I know what you've been doing. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his jaw. Louisa, listen to me. This isn't what you think. I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. Oh, so you didn't steal from me? You didn't drain our accounts behind my back? Nathan's jaw clenched. I was protecting us. Everything I did was for our future. No, I shot back. Everything you did was for yourself. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, Nathan's facade cracked. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. You're making a big mistake, Louisa. I met his gaze without flinching. No, Nathan, the only mistake I made was trusting you. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him standing there, the weight of his own downfall settling onto his shoulders. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Here is the fourth part of the conflict development, continuing seamlessly from the previous section. I sat in my car outside the law office, gripping my phone as I read Megan's message. I did some more digging. Nathan is in deeper than we thought. You need to move fast. My heart pounded, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. How much worse could it possibly get? I was about to find out. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my coat against the crisp autumn air, and walked into the building. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. Miss Carter, your attorney is ready for you. I nodded, my legs feeling unsteady as I followed the woman down a sleek hallway. A few minutes later, I sat across from Lisa Harding, a sharp-eyed attorney with a no-nonsense demeanor. Lisa had come highly recommended by Megan, and as soon as she started talking, I knew she was the right person for the job. I've reviewed the financial statements and police reports you provided, Lisa began, flipping through a folder. Your husband isn't just reckless, he's actively committing fraud. Offshore transfers, shell companies, unauthorized withdrawals. He's been funneling money out for months, possibly longer. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. How much of this can be traced back to me? Lisa sighed. Some of the accounts are in both of your names. If investigators believe you were complicit, you could be dragged into this. But based on what I see, Nathan has been deliberately hiding these transactions from you. I clenched my fists. So what do I do? You get ahead of it, Lisa said firmly. We file for legal separation immediately. We freeze all accounts in your name and cut financial ties as much as possible. That way, if charges are filed against Nathan, you won't be held responsible. I nodded. Do it. Lisa leaned forward. There's one more thing. If he realizes you're making moves, he might try to retaliate financially or otherwise. Have you considered the possibility that he might try to manipulate you into staying? I let out a bitter laugh. That's exactly what he does. Charm, threats, guilt, whatever it takes to stay in control. Lisa's expression hardened. Then you need to be prepared. Once we file, he'll know. And if he's desperate, he won't go down without a fight. My phone buzzed on the desk. Nathan. I let it ring. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. He's already sensing something is wrong. I took a deep breath. Let him. That night, I stayed at Megan's apartment, unwilling to go home and face Nathan just yet. Megan poured us each a glass of wine, her face lined with concern. You're doing the right thing, she said. I know, I murmured. But I'm not ready for the storm that's coming. Megan sat back. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be smarter than him. The next morning, Lisa filed the separation paperwork. Within hours, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Nathan. What the hell is this? You're making a huge mistake. You think you can do this to me? I ignored them all. By the time I finally returned home that evening, Nathan was waiting. He stood in the living room, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral, but I knew him too well. Beneath that forced calm was seething rage. So this is how you want to do this? He asked, his voice low. I'm done, Nathan, I said simply, setting my keys on the counter. I know everything. The offshore accounts, the missing money, the fraud. His eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. I shook my head. Don't insult me, Nathan. I've already spoken to the police, to my lawyer. I know what you've been doing. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his jaw. Louisa, listen to me. This isn't what you think, I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. Oh, so you didn't steal from me? You didn't drain our accounts behind my back? Nathan's jaw clenched. I was protecting us. Everything I did was for our future. No, I shot back. Everything you did was for yourself. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, Nathan's facade cracked. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. You're making a big mistake, Louisa. I met his gaze without flinching. No, Nathan. The only mistake I made was trusting you. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him standing there, the weight of his own downfall settling onto his shoulders. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Here's the first part of the climax, written in a seamless and engaging manner from the first-person perspective of the main character. I sat in the dimly lit kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter as I tried to steady my breathing. The house felt different now, colder, emptier, like a stage where the final act of a long, painful play was about to unfold. Nathan had barely spoken since I served him the separation papers, but the tension in the air was suffocating. I knew him too well. His silence wasn't acceptance, it was strategy. My phone buzzed again. A message from Megan. Stay alert. I found something else. My stomach clenched. What now? I quickly typed back. What is it? A few moments later, Megan replied. I checked into the offshore accounts. Some of them are linked to shell companies registered under your name. I felt the blood drain from my face. My name? If those accounts were being investigated, that meant. A slow clap echoed behind me. I turned sharply to find Nathan leaning against the doorway, a smug smirk stretching across his face. I was wondering when you'd figure it out, he mused, arms crossed. You always did love digging into things that don't concern you. My heart pounded in my chest. You put my name on those accounts? I demanded. Nathan tilted his head, feigning innocence. Why wouldn't I? We're married. Shared finances. It only makes sense. I shook my head in disbelief. You were setting me up. Nathan let out a slow, mocking chuckle. Come on, Evie. Don't act so shocked. You knew what I was doing, you just chose to ignore it. I took a step forward, fists clenched. I didn't ignore anything. I trusted you. His smile faltered for a split second before he recovered. Well, that was your mistake. I forced myself to stay calm. Anger wouldn't help me now. The police are already investigating, Nathan. They know about the fraud, the offshore accounts, everything. And now that I know you forged my name, Nathan's grin widened. And what exactly do you plan to do about it? I hesitated. He took a slow step forward, lowering his voice. Let me tell you how this plays out, sweetheart. You go to the cops, and suddenly you're under investigation too. They won't care that you didn't know you're still responsible. Fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. He shrugged. That could mean jail time. I swallowed hard, refusing to let him see my fear. But, Nathan continued, pretending to be thoughtful, there's another option. You drop this whole separation nonsense, back me up, and I make all of this go away. I let out a dry laugh. Go away? You really think you still have that kind of control? Nathan's smile faltered again. I built everything we have. Without me, you're nothing. I straightened, lifting my chin. Wrong. Without you, I'm finally free. Nathan's expression darkened. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Before I could react, he pulled out his phone and held up the screen. My eyes widened as I saw a series of emails, fabricated conversations, altered financial statements, all painting a picture of me as a willing accomplice in his schemes. Nathan grinned. Insurance policy. If I go down, I make sure you go down with me. My mind raced. This was worse than I had imagined. Nathan wasn't just trying to manipulate me, he was actively preparing to destroy me. I took a shaky breath. You're bluffing. Nathan arched a brow. Am I? He typed something on his phone. A moment later, my own phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen. Forwarded message from an anonymous account. Evidence attached. Should be enough to open an investigation. My blood ran cold. He had already prepared to turn it over to the authorities. Nathan leaned in, his voice low. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Either you back me up, or I make sure you go down with me. I stood frozen as he walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of his threat pressing down on my chest. I had to act fast. Grabbing my phone, I dialed Megan. Megan, I need your help. Now. Within 30 minutes, Megan was at my door, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. We need to flip this on him, Megan said. If we can prove he fabricated those emails, the police will see right through it. I bit my lip. And if we can't? Megan didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled up an encrypted folder. I recorded our last conversation, she admitted. He admitted to putting the accounts in your name. If we give this to the police, it proves he set you up. I stared at my best friend, emotions swirling. You recorded him? Megan gave me a look. I know you, Evie. I knew he'd try something like this. You needed a safety net. A slow smile spread across my face. Megan, you're a genius. Megan grinned. I know. We spent the next few hours compiling evidence, cross-referencing files, and preparing our case. By the time morning rolled around, I was exhausted, but I was ready. I called Detective Carter. I have something you need to hear, I said. 2 hours later, I was at the police station, sitting across from Carter as he listened to the recording. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair. This changes everything. I clenched my fists. Does it prove I wasn't involved? Carter nodded. It proves he set you up. And with the evidence we already have, this gives us enough leverage to push forward. Relief flooded through me. We'll move quickly, Carter assured me. If he tries to make good on his threat, we'll be ready. That night, I walked into the house with my head high. Nathan was waiting, arms crossed, a smirk already on his face. So? He asked. Made your decision? I set my bag down and met his gaze. Yeah, I have. Nathan's grin widened, and I went to the police. The smirk vanished. I gave them everything, I continued. The recording, the documents. They know you set me up. And now, they're coming for you. Nathan took a slow step back. You think you're untouchable? No, I said calmly. I think you finally ran out of ways to lie. A knock at the door made him freeze. I smiled. That would be them now. Nathan's face drained of color as Detective Carter's voice called from the other side. Nathan Parker, we have a warrant for your arrest. I stepped aside as the door swung open. Carter and two uniformed officers entered, and within seconds, Nathan was being cuffed. You can't do this, Nathan growled. You think I'm the bad guy? She's the one, save it, Carter interrupted. We already know the truth. As Nathan was led away, he shot one last glare at me. This isn't over. I folded my arms. Yes, Nathan, it is. The door shut behind them, and silence filled the house. For the first time in years, it felt like mine again. Here is the second part of the climax, written in a seamless and engaging manner from the first-person perspective of the main character. The moment the door shut behind the officers, taking Nathan with them, I let out a long breath. My hands were still trembling, my heart still hammering against my ribs. But I felt something I hadn't in a long time: relief. It was over, or at least it should have been. I pressed my back against the wall, exhaling sharply, trying to let my body catch up to what had just happened. Nathan had always been the type to talk his way out of trouble, to manipulate, to find loopholes. But not this time. This time I had been one step ahead. He had been too confident, too sure of his ability to control me. And now he was in handcuffs, finally facing the consequences of everything he had done. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt free. But something gnawed at me. Megan's last message flashed through my mind. Eve, I dug deeper. It's worse than we thought. I grabbed my phone and called her. She answered on the first ring. Tell me, I said, not even bothering with pleasantries. Megan took a deep breath. The financial mess was just the tip of the iceberg. Nathan wasn't just hiding money, he was laundering it. I stiffened. Laundering it for who? I don't know yet, but I found some weird transactions linked to offshore accounts that aren't even in his name. And get this, he was making regular payments to a law firm known for representing corporate criminals. Not just a defense lawyer, Eve. A fixer. My stomach twisted. You're telling me he was working with someone? Megan hesitated. I think he was covering for someone. And if I had to guess, they're not going to be happy that he got arrested. A cold chill ran down my spine. Nathan had been reckless, arrogant, always pushing boundaries. But this wasn't just about him anymore. What do I do? I asked. You stay ahead of it, Megan said firmly. The moment word gets out that Nathan's been arrested, whoever he was working with is going to want answers. You need to protect yourself. I closed my eyes, my mind racing. This was supposed to be the end of it. I had played the long game, gathered evidence, made sure Nathan had no way out. But now, I was realizing he wasn't the only enemy in this story. I grabbed my bag and my keys, my instincts screaming at me to move. Eve? Megan's voice was cautious. Where are you going? I don't know, I admitted, but I can't just sit here. You need to be careful. If Nathan was in deep with the wrong people, they might come looking for him. Or for you. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as I pulled out of my driveway. Megan wasn't wrong. I had no idea what Nathan had been involved in, how many lies he had told, how many deals he had made behind my back. And if he had been answering to someone else, they were going to want their money. By the time I pulled up to the police station, my hands were steady again. I needed answers. I needed to know exactly how much danger I was in. Detective Carter was sitting at his desk, flipping through a folder when I was escorted into his office. He looked up, immediately noticing the tension in my posture. What's wrong? He asked, setting his pen down. I sat down across from him, gripping my purse in my lap. I need to know what you found about Nathan. Carter exhaled through his nose, tapping his fingers against the desk. I was going to call you in the morning. There's a lot. Tell me, I insisted. He opened the file and slid a few documents toward me. Your husband wasn't just committing fraud, he was linked to a network of financial crimes. Money laundering, embezzlement, shell corporations set up to hide assets. And according to some of our sources, he wasn't the mastermind. I felt my stomach drop. Then who was? Carter shook his head. That's what we're trying to figure out. But Nathan wasn't acting alone. Someone was feeding him money, and he was moving it through various channels. Offshore accounts, investments in fake businesses, property sales. We just don't know who was pulling the strings. I swallowed hard. Megan said he was paying a lawyer, a fixer. Carter's jaw tightened. That's bad news. People don't hire fixers unless they have something serious to hide. I leaned forward. Am I in danger? Carter hesitated. I won't lie to you. If Nathan was working for someone powerful, they might see you as a liability, especially now that you've exposed him. My heart pounded. This wasn't supposed to be how it ended. Nathan was supposed to be out of my life. He was supposed to face justice. I was supposed to be free. But now I had painted a target on my back. I sat there trying to process everything when my phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. You made a mistake. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Carter saw the look on my face and frowned. What is it? I turned my phone toward him. His eyes narrowed. He stood up immediately. We need to move you somewhere safe. Panic coiled around my ribs, but I forced myself to stay calm. What do you mean? Carter grabbed his coat. This isn't just about Nathan anymore. If someone just threatened you, it means they're watching. They know you were the one who took him down. My pulse pounded. So what do I do? Carter's expression was grim. You disappear. At least until we figure out who's behind this. I swallowed hard, gripping my phone as another message came through. Unknown number. Did you really think this was over? My breath came in sharp bursts. No, it wasn't over. Not even close. Here is the final part of the story, written in a compelling and engaging manner from the first-person perspective of the main character. The air felt heavier, pressing against my skin like a silent warning. I stood by the window, peering through the blinds, scanning the street below. Nothing seemed out of place, just the occasional passing car, the dim glow of streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It had been 3 days since Nathan's arrest. 3 days since my phone first buzzed with the unknown number. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't over. Someone was still out there, waiting, watching, calculating their next move. And I knew, deep in my gut, that whoever they weren't going to just let me walk away from this unscathed. I turned back to Detective Carter, who was sitting at my dining table, flipping through the latest case files. He had insisted on stationing 2 officers outside my house, but even with them there, I felt exposed, vulnerable. We need to figure out who sent those messages, I said, arms crossed, trying to steady my breath. Carter exhaled through his nose, tapping a finger against the folder. We're working on tracing the number, but whoever it is, they're covering their tracks well. Could be a burner phone. Could be a proxy server masking their location. But one thing's clear, they want you to know they're watching. I swallowed hard, and what happens when they decide watching isn't enough. Carter's gaze darkened. Then we make sure they regret ever making you a target. His words were meant to reassure me, but I wasn't the type to wait around, hoping the system would catch up before something terrible happened. I had learned my lesson with Nathan: never give the enemy the upper hand. I reached for my phone and dialed Megan. She picked up on the first ring. Tell me you found something. I did. Her voice was tense, clipped. And you're not going to like it. My stomach clenched. Go on. Megan hesitated. Nathan's fixer? The one he was paying to cover his tracks? He's not just some shady lawyer. His name is Daniel Holt, and he has ties to organized crime. My grip tightened on the phone. You're telling me Nathan was involved with the mob? Not directly, Megan clarified, but he was laundering money for people who are. And with him behind bars, those people are now missing a very important middleman. My mouth went dry. And they think I know too much. Bingo. Megan sighed on the other end of the line. Eve, I need you to listen to me. These people don't play games. They don't do loose ends. You need to disappear at least until Carter's team figures out how deep this goes. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't going to run, but the truth was, I had already been considering it. I had fought too hard, lost too much, to end up as collateral damage in someone else's war. I took a shaky breath. How fast can you get here? I'm already on my way. I hung up and turned to Carter. I need to leave. He nodded, unsurprised. We can put you into protective custody. No, I cut in. I'm not going into hiding. I'm going on the offensive. Carter's brows lifted slightly. That so? Yes. I grabbed my coat, slipping my phone into my pocket. Nathan thought he could destroy me, and now these people think they can silence me. But they don't know who they're dealing with. Carter studied me for a long moment before nodding. Then let's make sure you have everything you need to win this. Within the hour, Megan arrived, her car packed with essentials burner phones, cash, a laptop with encrypted access to every document she had dug up on Nathan's dealings. We drove through the night, heading to a safe house Carter had arranged outside the city. It was a small cabin tucked deep into the woods, the kind of place where no one could find you unless they knew exactly where to look. As I stepped inside, the weight of everything I had been carrying settled onto my shoulders. Megan dropped onto the couch, rubbing her temples. All right, let's strategize. If we can find a way to link Nathan's fixer to his mob connections, we can force them into the spotlight. They won't come after you if they're too busy covering their own asses. I nodded, pulling out my laptop. Then let's make sure the whole world sees exactly what they don't want exposed. For the next 2 days, we worked tirelessly, piecing together every bit of evidence we had. Emails, bank statements, offshore accounts, everything connected, everything leading back to the people who had funded Nathan's schemes. And once we had enough, I made the call that would change everything. I reached out to an investigative journalist, one with a reputation for exposing corruption at the highest levels. I handed over everything, every file, every document, every piece of leverage I had. And then we waited. It didn't take long. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Financial scandal unveiled. High-profile money laundering scheme exposed. Nathan's name was front and center. But more importantly, so were the names of the people he had been working for. And just like that, the hunter became the hunted. By the time Carter called me, his tone was laced with satisfaction. They're scrambling. Their fixer just disappeared off the grid, and their accounts are being investigated by the feds. You did it, Eve. I let out a slow breath. Then it's over? For them, maybe, Carter said. For you, it's just the beginning. He was right. I had spent years being controlled, manipulated, underestimated. But now I had taken my power back. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was free. And just like that, the tables turned. My husband thought he could steal from me, manipulate me, and walk away unscathed. But I made sure he faced the ultimate consequences. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every betrayal, it all came back to haunt him. But now, I have to ask you, do you think justice was served? Should I have taken things even further? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever faced a betrayal like this, share your story. I know, I'm not alone in this. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Trust is earned, not given blindly. I learned the hard way that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. It comes from those closest to you, the ones you least expect. Financial independence isn't just about money, it's about control, security, and having the power to walk away when you need to. If someone takes advantage of you, don't stay silent, fight back with intelligence, strategy, and the law. America rewards those who stand their ground, who refuse to be victims. Protect yourself, your assets, and your future. Because in the end, no one will fight for you the way you fight for yourself.